Mexico is hitting back, no longer the silent partner. It's taking aim at U.S. tariffs with bold countermeasures. This isn't just a response, it's a reset. A new power move in North American trade has begun. Mexico strikes back, a strategic counteroffensive that could reshape global trade dynamics. Mexico is no longer holding back. In response to the United States' renewed wave of protectionist tariffs, Mexico has launched a well-calculated counterstrike, one that could not only reshape North American trade dynamics, but also reverberate across the global economy. The age of passive cooperation appears to be ending as regional players assert their sovereignty against a backdrop of shifting global power structures. Once a seamless cog in the U.S.-centric manufacturing ecosystem, particularly in automotive and electronics, Mexico has decided to challenge that status quo. The catalyst, a controversial tariff initiative from Washington aimed at boosting domestic production. But President Claudia Sheinbaum isn't simply reacting. On March 29, 2025, she delivered a bold declaration. Mexico will no longer acquiesce to unilateral economic coercion. What makes this retaliation different is its scope. Gone are the days when the dispute was narrowly confined to cars and trucks. Now Mexico is targeting a broad array of high-impact sectors: electric vehicles, EVs, agriculture, energy, and raw materials. The decision reflects a deliberate shift in strategy, from defensive measures to a posture of economic assertiveness. Mexico's escalation doesn't stand in isolation either. Canada's recent imposition of a 25% tariff on American cars signals a coordinated front forming across the continent. The United States now finds itself encircled by two of its largest trading partners, each challenging the core assumptions of America first. But at its heart, this isn't just a tariff war, it's a battle over the future of economic influence. By hitting emerging sectors like EVs and clean energy, Mexico is staking a claim not just as a regional player, but as a global one. It is using the trade battlefield to reposition itself in a world increasingly defined by green tech, digital integration, and supply chain resilience. As these tensions escalate, a question looms. Is the U.S. risking isolation in its bid for economic self-reliance? Or will this pressure from its neighbors compel a strategic recalibration? No matter the outcome, Mexico is no longer content to play the junior partner. It is now an active architect in redrawing the economic rules of engagement. U.S.-Mexico tariff confrontation, an escalating crossroads of diplomacy and economic warfare. Breaking point in bilateral relations. The trade rift between the United States and Mexico has reached a dangerous inflection point, with former President Donald Trump's unexpected enforcement of a blanket 25% tariff on all non-U.S. manufactured vehicles. The fragile balance maintained since the implementation of the USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, is now under threat. What was once a tightly coordinated trilateral economic zone is on the brink of unraveling. President Claudia Sheinbaum responded with poise but determination, announcing that Mexico is finalizing a comprehensive retaliatory tariff package set for release on April 3rd. Yet amid the rising pressure, she emphasized her openness to diplomatic channels. Her message was clear. Mexico is prepared to defend its national interests, but still values a path to resolution. If Washington is willing to reciprocate, the USMCA, a symbol of North American cooperation, is now under severe strain. While Trump's actions challenge its intent, the agreement still contains mechanisms that could prevent a total collapse. For instance, importers may certify the U.S. content of their goods to reduce tariff exposure, offering a lifeline to companies scrambling for legal workarounds. This clause, often overlooked, could prove essential in softening the economic fallout. Two-track strategy, Mexico's balanced game of retaliation and restraint. Mexico's approach is defined by a careful duality, open to diplomacy, yet fully prepared for economic combat. Economy Minister Marcelo Ebrard, currently stationed in Washington, has led multiple negotiation rounds aimed at securing sector-specific exemptions. These talks reflect a pragmatic desire to de-escalate while maintaining leverage. But Mexico's readiness to retaliate is not mere rhetoric. A phased system of counter-tariffs proposed at levels of 10%, 20%, and possibly 25% has already been drafted. Should negotiations fail, these could be activated swiftly, signaling Mexico's willingness to mirror U.S. tactics. Given Mexico's crucial role in global manufacturing networks, these countermeasures would not only impact the U.S., but disrupt international supply chains as well. Economic forecasts paint a sobering picture. Analysts warn that U.S. industries could face up to $150 billion in losses if Mexico's tariffs are fully enacted. The EV sector in particular stands on precarious ground. Its complex multinational supply chains make it highly susceptible to cost increases and production delays. Innovation could slow, prices could surge, and both nations could lose ground in the race toward a sustainable future. This standoff is no longer just a bilateral dispute. It's a broader test of how nations respond to unilateralism in a multipolar world. Will economic nationalism triumph, or will interdependence and cooperation find new champions? Interdependence under siege, U.S.-Mexico trade. Ties on a precipice. When integration becomes a liability. By the close of 2024, trade between the United States and Mexico had ballooned to a staggering $800 billion annually, a staggering figure that underscores the intricate mutual dependence underpinning the region's prosperity. Sectors like automobiles, electronics, agriculture, and industrial machinery form the pillars of this economic synergy, with Mexico increasingly emerging as a powerhouse in electric vehicle (EV) components and lithium battery exports, an area where growth has surged over 40% within 5 years. Yet this tightly woven economic fabric is now beginning to unravel. Washington's latest move, imposing a sweeping 25% tariff on Mexican imports, poses a serious threat to the very framework that sustains North America's cross-border production model. For key economic regions like Texas and California, which rely heavily on seamless integration with Mexican suppliers, the fallout could be immediate: rising operational costs, fractured supply chains, and thousands of manufacturing jobs on the line. Industries that function on razor-thin margins and demand logistical precision, like EV assembly, green tech systems, and high-performance electronics, face the stark reality of delays, inflationary pressures, and diminishing global competitiveness. The message is clear. What took decades to build in regional cooperation can be destabilized in months by short-term protectionist strategies. Strategic pushback or economic self-defense. Critics in Washington are framing Mexico's retaliatory tariffs as unnecessarily aggressive, but in Mexico City, the counterargument is gaining momentum. This is not retaliation for retaliation's sake. It is an act of economic preservation. The Sheinbaum government insists that its countermeasures are not signals of hostility, but of strategic rebalancing, aimed at defending national interests in an increasingly asymmetric relationship. Agriculture has emerged as one of the most volatile flashpoints in this confrontation. Should Mexico decide to restrict imports of key U.S. staples, such as tomatoes, avocados, chili peppers, or fruit juices, the repercussions would ripple quickly through American households. Food prices could spike across retail and hospitality sectors, especially in states like California and Florida, which are heavily reliant on these products. But the turbulence doesn't end with food. A much broader spectrum of industries, from construction materials to consumer electronics, remain vulnerable to Mexican countermeasures. Each retaliatory step Mexico takes serves to illuminate a sobering truth. North America's economic interdependence, once viewed as a stabilizing force, now resembles a delicate tightrope, one where political missteps could trigger cascading shocks. What began as a unilateral protectionist policy from Washington has rapidly transformed into a regional reckoning. Mexico's message is unwavering. The nation is prepared to weather short-term disruptions if it means asserting long-term autonomy and recalibrating an economic model seen by many as imbalanced and unsustainable. Mexico's strategic pivot: decoupling, diversification, and defiance. Charting a new economic trajectory. As trade tensions flare, Mexico is no longer waiting to be at the mercy of U.S. policy swings. President Claudia Sheinbaum has unveiled a forward-leaning strategy that seeks to end the country's over-reliance on its northern neighbor. Although the United States still absorbs nearly 80% of Mexican exports, the new doctrine emerging from Mexico City aims to redefine this dependency, not through confrontation, but through diversification. This isn't a reactionary stance, it's a foundational shift, a strategic overhaul of Mexico's economic philosophy. The Sheinbaum administration is actively cultivating deeper ties with alternative trade giants. China, Japan, and the European Union. Ongoing negotiations signal a broader ambition to anchor Mexico more firmly into a globalized economic framework, thereby building resilience against U.S.-centric disruptions. What's unfolding is a calculated play for geopolitical leverage. By expanding trade corridors and diversifying markets, Mexico is not only shielding itself from external shocks, but also laying the groundwork to elevate its role in the global economic order, one that's rapidly evolving toward multipolarity. Lithium and the race up the value chain. At the heart of this new vision is a transformative opportunity, Mexico's untapped potential in the lithium economy. As the world accelerates its transition toward clean energy, demand for critical minerals like lithium, the white gold of the 21st century, is skyrocketing. Mexico's resource-rich lands have caught the attention of global investors eager to stake their claim in the future of battery technology. But Mexico doesn't just want to dig and export. Under Sheinbaum's leadership, lithium is being reframed as a national asset, one capable of driving industrial transformation. Rather than playing the role of raw material supplier, Mexico is actively investing in domestic processing and battery production industries. This shift signals an ambitious step away from its historical role as a low-cost labor center toward a high-value, innovation-driven economy. The broader vision is bold. Position Mexico as a serious contender in the green industrial revolution and gain a stronger foothold in shaping future trade negotiations. This effort is already winning public favor. A recent surge in nationalist sentiment, rooted in long-standing frustrations over perceived economic subordination, has fueled widespread support for Sheinbaum's assertive strategy. Over 60% of the Mexican public now backs her tough stance against Washington, interpreting it as a necessary stand for dignity, sovereignty, and sustainable self-determination. Escalating tensions and the prospect of negotiation. The North American trade equilibrium is undergoing a seismic shift. As of April 2nd, Canada officially joined Mexico in mounting an assertive response to escalating U.S. tariffs, a move that transformed isolated discontent into a unified regional pushback. This isn't just a policy disagreement, it's a recalibration of power dynamics within one of the world's most economically integrated zones. Ottawa's swift deployment of counter-tariffs sends a deliberate message. Canada is done playing by a lopsided rulebook. U.S. officials have attempted to downplay the situation, citing deep-rooted economic interdependence as a barrier to prolonged conflict. But that assumption overlooks a critical evolution. Economic integration has armed Washington's neighbors with leverage of their own. Canada's tariffs are anything but performative. They are finely targeted and politically astute, zeroing in on key American exports like dairy, corn, industrial machinery, and specialty metals, items tightly linked to voting blocs in battleground states, such as Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. This isn't just economic retaliation, it's tactical disruption aimed at the heart of U.S. political calculus ahead of a pivotal presidential election cycle. In parallel, the Canadian government is rolling out domestic safeguard programs to shield its industries from U.S. tariffs, highlighting a dual-front approach: assert externally, protect internally. With this, Canada isn't just reacting to American pressure, it's laying down a doctrine. Economic sovereignty is non-negotiable, even in the face of overwhelming power. While Canada's measures are tactically precise, Mexico is executing a broader, more systemic strategy. President Claudia Sheinbaum's administration is deploying a two-pronged response: immediate countermeasures paired with long-term realignment. Mexico's retaliatory tariffs hit a wide array of U.S. exports: processed food, petrochemicals, auto parts, focusing on sectors where import substitution is not only feasible, but politically palatable. But beyond the headlines lies a deeper shift. Mexico is accelerating its pivot away from economic overdependence on the U.S. by actively forging new trade alliances with blocs such as the European Union and the CPTP, Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. This diversification push is more than symbolic. It is a forward-looking hedge against future disruptions and an effort to rewire the country's position in the global economic order. For the first time in decades, Mexico is articulating a vision of itself not just as a neighbor to the U.S., but as a regional power with global reach. Meanwhile, attempts by U.S. policymakers to fracture the Mexico-Canada front through selective exemptions or bilateral incentives appear to be failing. Instead, high-level coordination between Ottawa and Mexico City is intensifying. Joint communiques, diplomatic visits, and synchronized trade rhetoric all suggest a growing consensus. North America's smaller players will no longer be maneuvered into competition with each other to secure favor from Washington. The strategic signal is unmistakable. Canada and Mexico are choosing unity over division, pushing back not merely on policy, but on the very premise of economic subordination. The consequences of this trilateral breakdown are now spilling over into some of the most advanced and globally connected industries, particularly electric vehicles, EVs, and semiconductors. These are sectors built on the promise of cross-border efficiency, fast innovation cycles, and scale. But now, the very logic that made North America a competitive production zone is being disrupted. For years, Mexico has offered an ideal formula: skilled labor, favorable costs, and immediate access to the U.S. market. This model attracted billions in foreign investment, particularly from Europe and Asia. But with rising tariffs, erratic customs enforcement, and political friction, that once stable advantage is being called into question. Reports of EV plant delays in northern Mexico are already surfacing, linked to intensified inspections and tariff recalculations. Semiconductor firms, which depend on hyper-synchronized supply networks, warn that increased costs may halt expansion plans or even force relocation. These disruptions have ripple effects, not just in automotive tech, but in satellite industries like renewable energy, healthcare devices, and telecommunications infrastructure. What began as a narrowly framed protectionist measure by the U.S. has grown into a full-blown reconfiguration of the North American economic architecture. But far from folding, Canada and Mexico are responding with adaptive strategies, leveraging precision retaliation, forging new alliances, and reasserting their place at the negotiating table. This moment signals more than a temporary trade dispute. It marks a shift in the continental balance of power. For the first time in modern history, America's neighbors are not simply reacting. They're rewriting the rules of regional engagement, not with defiance alone, but with resilience, collaboration, and a forward-looking economic doctrine. The regional future and Mexico's assertive message. President Claudia Sheinbaum's powerful words, "We are not the enemy of anyone, but we will bow to no one. When we are unilaterally imposed upon, we must respond," have struck a chord that reverberates far beyond diplomatic circles. It is more than just a political statement. It marks a profound shift in Mexico's self-perception on the world stage. Within hours, her declaration swept across media outlets and social networks, hailed by many as a historic turning point. For a nation long tethered, economically, politically, and symbolically, to its powerful neighbor to the north, this moment represents a bold step towards strategic self-definition. No longer content with playing a subordinate role in a U.S.-dominated regional framework, Mexico is announcing that the age of quiet compliance is over. The message carries weight not just because of its timing, but because of what it signals: a country prepared to navigate a multipolar world on its own terms. This newfound assertiveness is not just rhetorical. It reflects a deep undercurrent of national frustration, decades in the making. From trade negotiations that heavily favored U.S. interests to repeated disputes over immigration and border control, Mexico has often found itself negotiating from a place of disadvantage. Now, with the United States leaning further into protectionism, Mexico is refusing to play its traditional role as a silent junior partner. Instead, the Sheinbaum administration is embracing a strategic recalibration, one that seeks fairness, mutual respect, and a seat at the table not as a facilitator, but as a co-architect. International observers are increasingly framing this moment as a pivot point in the post-NAFTA regional order. Gone is the model in which Mexico served primarily as a low-cost manufacturing extension of the U.S. economy. In its place, a new vision is emerging, one where Mexico becomes a hub for innovation, a steward of critical resources like lithium, and a key player in the green industrial transformation. This broader ambition includes diversifying partnerships with the EU, China, and members of the CPTP, as well as investing in high-value industries such as electric vehicle battery production. It's a move away from dependency toward a future shaped by economic sovereignty and regional balance. Of course, Mexico's pivot doesn't come without cost. The economies of Mexico and the United States remain deeply intertwined, with hundreds of billions of dollars flowing between them every year. Disrupting that flow could bring immediate pain, slower production, disrupted investments, and price hikes for everyday goods. But President Sheinbaum appears undeterred. Inside her administration, there is a growing belief that short-term discomfort is a price worth paying for long-term independence. And the public seems to agree. Years of border wall rhetoric, trade threats, and perceived diplomatic disrespect have hardened sentiment across the country. Recent polling shows a solid majority of Mexicans as support this tougher line, not just out of patriotism, but from a deep-seated sense that the old model was never truly equitable. In this climate, Scheinbaum's message has found fertile ground. It is not just politically useful, it is widely seen as morally necessary. As Mexico prepares to unveil its finalized tariff response on April 3rd, the region watches closely. Will Washington retreat from the brink or double down on its unilateral course? Whatever the immediate outcome, one reality is undeniable. Mexico has redrawn the lines of engagement. No longer a quiet participant in someone else's economic vision, Mexico is now an active shaper of its own destiny. And in doing so, it is helping to usher in a new chapter in North American relations, one marked not by dominance and deference, but by pluralism, parity, and purpose. Mexico's bold stand isn't just a moment, it's a movement. What began as a trade dispute has evolved into a defining chapter in North American relations, with Mexico stepping into a role of strategic leadership and economic independence. As the world watches this shift unfold, one thing is clear. The rules of engagement are being rewritten. If you found this story insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Eagle Discovery for more deep-dive global narratives and hidden geopolitical truths. The next chapter is just beginning. Stay tuned.